break would never come as long as fear could turn to wrath. John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. In a bare-stricken field, a man pounds a dull metal plow into barren ground. His arms swing like a minute hand. Hour after hour, he beats on the red crust. His plow chips the surface, the sound of devil's heckle. Hot dust fills in the crease above his brow. The wrinkled skin of his knuckles suction tight around bones. Palms bind blisters blood with a splintered wooden handle. He heaves a limp, loose body, pleading with the soil. The 3 cotton dresses tumbling, scuffing on the crust, and the oven smoke sifting through split pine walls lifts his plow. In a low-muted thud, he labors, will live off the fat of the land. As the western sun throbs a wave of white heat, the man leans over his plow. Sweat drips from his upper lip. For a moment, a small speck of soil is lush and brown, the kind that cakes your hands, nurtures a soft white farmhouse, grows green grass embracing the stumble of 3 young children. But as the sun blazed on, the dream quickly evaporated. His home still a quivering stack, from the fields burst thickets. But he swings again, pulls up dust and clay, pleading the land to produce, to nurture the fall of those 3 cotton dresses stained red.
Is golden flecked and unpretty. His wings hang from silver hooks sunken into flesh. His back curves like roots of cypress, and his crown is littered with lavender buds. And every spring, roses split his ears. Each eve, moon in his mouth, he'd sing of the chosen ones. David's butterflies weaved into wheat hair like a crown. Abraham's lids studded with stars. My God grew me slow. He'd sing me soft with sweet floods and drowned apples, slip silver hymns into my ear. Whenever I slept, I sang Gomorrah, Goliath, sweeping pillars of salt, Isaac's life whittled to the width of his father's knife. My still God weaved me from silver and tulle. He wore me frayed. My still God bathes in gold and eats pale stars with sharp human teeth. He perches on my nighttime sill and begs for love like storms beg for blood. He begs light, screams when his skin rips and only the trees mourn, when his wing flaps and barely a bird calls. And when he's gone, I tear sleep songs from my ears.
My mother doesn't come out of her room anymore. My father says she'll be better in the morning, but each time the sun stretches its sleepy arms, she's buried beneath voices raining over her. My father took care of the phone calls and her at night. He was the only one who knew the lullaby for the whitewashed hurricane in her mind. My father told my brother and me not to answer the phone. You don't know what to say to them. He didn't either. The church calls first. They offer long prayers and recipes to settle the soul. He'd put the phone to her ear. She'd like to listen to the foods, pecan pies, fresh bread, and hot cakes. My father squeezed his palm into hers, the hand lines fitting perfectly while her mind created dinners with the light of the moon. The conversation lingers on with stories of her dropping candies into the plastic purses of little girls. My father peeled back sticky memories and conjures the best laugh he could. The church accepted it. They didn't have another option. The debit collector's calls was next. Their voices didn't hold the plastic shine of missionary women. Voices through the receiver were stiff, clogging the mouthpiece. My father jammed his fingers through his silver hair. We mailed it. We never did. Our money wasn't going to help anyway. His voice was heavy, drooping off his thin lips. My father hung up. It would ring again in another 5 minutes. The next collector was automated, leaving no room for discussion. Again, the phone rang. My father sat listening to the sound bounce off our walls into each of our rooms. The phone continued to ring, but he kept squeezing her hand and watching dead leaves fall from her wild blonde hair. My brother used to drag his hands against her door, searching for splinters to gash his palm. Now he doesn't look. He wants to pass her room, but he cringes at the sound of her laughter seeping through the wood. It dribbles onto his feet, rising until he's surrounded. My brother thrashed at his room, desperately clutching on to the doorknob. He slammed the door to her voice, but her face was hidden beneath his eyelids. He grabbed nothing but a few notebooks and a clean shirt. He had to go. My father rushed in and tried to grab onto his shaking arm. Don't give up. My brother's eyes were running rivers. My father let go. The river spilled into the waterfalls of his cheeks. My brother's fingers curled into man hands cracking against the wall near our old family photo. His girlfriend came to the door blankly watching blood drip from his knuckles, splash onto carpet grime. My brother reaches for her hips. Her skin was a cold brush of wind and holding on to the last atom of oxygen. He smiled and she stared. I told him she reminds me of her. Go to hell. He didn't come home for a week. I tried to remember her recipes. Her favorite dessert was apple pie with a hint of spice. I grabbed the ingredients from the cabinets, piling them onto the table. Her voice raised throughout the house. The words play with each other, pretending to form sentences. I turned on the oven to preheat and knead dough with the force of falling tree limbs. She called my name. I hadn't heard it in a while. It sounds sweet as it teased her tongue. Syllables warmed my hands. Her laughter followed quickly behind it, a rising mist from a violent cascade. I tried to focus on the syrupy concoction in front of me, counting soft apples sinking into batter. She said my name again. It flooded into my ears, dragging my attention into her room. I zigzagged the crust on top and quickly placed the pie in the oven. I could already smell the apples as I ascended up the stairs. I peered into her room. Her smile was a light bulb, leading me closer to her. Her arms were waved open, but I watched her tender hands, the same hands that used to walk me to my bus stop in the morning. Her hands rubbed my frizzy hair and kissed my red cheeks, promising to be right here when it was all over. But we all can't keep our promises. Smells of cinnamon burned my nose as she pulled me in for a hug. The apple was drowning beneath it, fighting to be preserved. Her lips were pressed into my ear. I only trust you. They're all out to get me. Her giggles thundered while her unrecognizable fingertips played with the silver beneath her pillow. A fork. She gripped it, swinging it around. The cinnamon ripped into the room. Small clouds of gray snuck underneath her door. It's impossible to breathe. She edged it closer to my face, stroking the freckles on my nose. You are my savior. Everyone is home this time. I try to walk past her door, but the sounds of her screams lure me from behind. I slide against the wall, listening. My fingertips scrape against uneven sanding, enjoying the burn. Her screams are getting louder. I can only imagine her hazel eyes melting into the black pavilion of her pupil. My brother comes by, watching me not watch her. His small hands grasp onto mine tightly. We don't speak. Her mouth wide, stretching from self-inflicted scratches from either side of her face. My father comes up the stairs watching us. He comes sits on my other side. Without saying anything, he intertwines our fingertips. Her legs are flailing against one another, knocking over the recently repaired family photo on her bedside table. The storm continues. We sit on the other side of the door, counting passing seconds as unanswered prayers.
Us. Do what we're told. Chest out, legs together, back rigid, blank arms, empty minds, and act like a lady. Good girls. Her. Long legs, pale skin, blonde hair, short skirts, high socks, and button-down shirts. Hands folded, head down, knees ache, bless all, choir sings, and single file. Cheerful smiles, has a lover, straight D's, party nights, baby bump, and cigarette smoke. Sharing needles, guys in alleys, passing out, waking up, purple face, and pink casket. Me. Fat legs, tan skin, brown hair, long skirts, short socks, and button-down shirts. Hands apart, head up, skull aches, hate all, band roars, and single file. Empty faces, no friends, straight A's movie nights, big belly, and cigarette smoke. Sharing food, steady buddy, fall asleep, waking up, purple neck, and pink casket. Good girls.
The boy let himself in like he entered confession. Head down, he sat and crossed his ankles, carrying the Bible, a Marvel comic, and a copy of Anne of Green Gables. He introduced himself as Peter, looking at the ground. Constance nodded at him, but continued to run her fingers over her cardigan, conducting an invisible orchestra with her jello spoon. He opened Anne of Green Gables to the first page and got as far as the second before she interrupted him. You know, it's probably good that they're gone, she said, touching where her breasts used to be. My ex-husband used to go about them all wrong. Peter nodded. They'd warned him about this. The older ones lost it at times. He read in a monotone voice, but Constance decided he was a good boy. Even though when his rosary dropped to the floor, he didn't pick it up. Even though he said, damn it, under his breath when he mispronounced words. When it got to the part about Anne's childhood, she leaned back, tugging the cardigan closer. She sighed, leaning further back again. She sighed, louder. He was like a Rubik's Cube, you know, too hard to figure out and 20 years out of style. We should finish reading. Constance nodded as if this was a sound plan, snatching the comic book from his hands. She opened it to a random page in the middle and leaned back again. You're right, we should read. He grabbed her wrist and she let the book fall to the floor. My dad gave me that. Then read it. Peter glared. I'm not supposed to read this one to the old ladies. Constance looked over her shoulder, under her bed. I don't see any here. He opened the book. He relaxed, read in a lighter voice, sped up at appropriate places, and didn't stumble as much. About halfway towards the end, Constance cleared her throat, distracted now. She asked if Peter knew how to bake. Strudel? Constance could go for a good strudel, like the kind her daughter made. He said he would ask. What's that in there? She asked, pointing at his backpack he carried on his way in. A woman's watch with a narrow face and gold hands. He snatched the bag back. It's my mom's. Before she could get the wrong idea, he shook his head. She's not dead or anything, she just works a lot. But she's got a job and a house closer to the city so she can work. I'll see her a lot once she gets settled in. I know this, she told me. Constance wanted to change the subject. She raised her leg. My ex-husband's got the same tattoo, see? She showed him a little outline of a baby cow. Get it? A calf on a calf? Peter nodded, feeling he'd lost her once more. Yeah. Anyway, he moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 35. When he asked her why, her brow pulled in and she rubbed the sore on her neck just above the scars. 2 weeks after her surgery, her husband began to feel like they were growing apart. When the doctors recommended she removed her second as well, just to be safe, that was it. She pulled the cardigan tighter and crossed her legs. I don't know, kid. Men can't handle a woman like me. The two of them talked a little more about his mom, and Peter reread the comic book. Constance Ford came up with a game to read Anne of Green Gables, but backwards. You won't understand anything if you go the wrong way, Peter searched for reason in her logic. To be fair, Constance never understood much more going the right way either. The endings are the best part. That's when all the problems get wrapped up. But this way, we don't have to hear about the sad parts. So they read the book backwards. He came back the next day and the next after that. Catholic school community service for breathing near the Eucharist. When her legs began to ache again and he would make the obligatory sign of the cross, she snapped her fingers. Don't pray for me yet, kid. On the 12th day, he gave her a few of his books. Sometimes she would ask the nurse to bring the wheelchair and take them to the garden. She claimed she didn't need the wheelchair, but doctors said no more roller coasters, so she made do. Peter would sit on a patch of grass and tell her more about his mother, or she would tell him about living in San Francisco before her husband disappeared. He would ask about her family, and she would rub her neck, pull the cardigan closer, and say nothing. She danced around and answered, then offered to show him her calf again. Still, he paid attention, hoping to piece together a story from the fragments she gave him. Finally, he couldn't take it. Why do you always wear that cardigan? He asked her one day, spreading out in the grass. Don't you, wash it? And get rid of the beautiful stains? She pointed at the spaghetti sauce they'd shared a week earlier. You're kidding. 2 months passed of their daily visits, and Peter stopped bringing comic books. Instead, she was teaching him how to cheat at Operation and watch horror movies and laugh. You really want to get scared, she would say? Watch the news. A few days before Thanksgiving, he arrived to a room with a board game. He passed his requirement for community service 28 days ago. Constance wasn't there, or in the garden, or in the library, or in the cafeteria. The nurse came in and asked if he'd be interested in reading to the new patient. He waited for her to leave, then sat on the bed for a long while. She had left her watch.
It's been 3 weeks since you've been gone, and this is the 4th time I've done your laundry. I sit on the couch, a small pile of clothes in my lap, still stiff. I hold up your onesie speckled with tiny flowers and sea creatures, letting the wrinkles fall out as I gently shake them to the floor. I press the fabric to my nose, inhaling light floral notes. This was my favorite turquoise dress. Cinched at the bottom, chevron pattern, embroidered with your initials. I love the way your feet would have dangled out at the bottom with ruffled socks, even at the peak of Florida's summer. This was the outfit I would write about in your scrapbook, page 2, just after the only completed page, stamped with your footprints, paired with our matching hospital bracelets.
The stink of fungus, decay, stale rain clings to our skin, sticks in our hair. It makes the nights cold and the days thick with gray humidity. The water in the air chokes like cigarette smoke. The blood runs. We sing our empty songs. We carry pictures in our helmets, joke that walking here is to tiptoe on the devil's backbone. The blood runs red. At night, God hears our ashen nightmares, things we don't speak of. The bunny with one button eye, lying limp, copper splattered like paint. Stitched paw in the hand of the girl with one button eye, and the blood runs black.
I was standing by the fountain when you snuck up behind me, slung your ratty gray overshirt around my neck, and choked me. I could see the sexism dangling from your lip like a fish hook, dancing with laughter as your merry men congratulated this Robin Hood on sending an arrow straight through my heart. But as I whipped the strangling cloth from my neck and slammed the fabric against your face, your teeth jangled like the beads of a baby rattle, and I realized just what you are. You are the crudely painted foam sword in the dollar toy aisle, flaunting nothing but a stubby blade and a garish handle on things. Your life is spent trying so diligently to sink into innocent flesh and prove your worth, yet you curl at the limpest prod, the slightest attack. Even air does not flee at your swipe, and children laugh at your efforts. And as you rubbed your aching jaw and balled the button up in your hands, your eyes could not meet mine. For we both knew the truth that you would never admit, that your cheap jokes are worth so little, and it is people like you who always break.
Billy McGee thinks of his mother when officers slam him against the car. Delinquent curls fall from his slick hair. He thinks of his father. Pressed against glass, his lips pout towards the moon, and he thinks of kissing. Breath leaks from his nostrils in tufts of smoke. Two cops fumble with quicksilver handcuffs. With childlike eyes, Billy scans the inside of a dark police car. Bars dividing the front of the car from the back snarl at Billy like decaying tiger teeth. Billy snarls back. An officer reads him his Fifth Amendment rights. Billy only hears sirens whirling. An hour ago, he barreled down stretches of Adirondack roads. When he wasn't paying attention, swarms of police cars flocked behind him. The brigade of cars stole the open road, forcing his car off the highway. Trembling hands followed humbly like shaking servants, steering towards the left. He thrashed in his car seat, punching fists against steering wheel, playing muted leather drums until he was deaf with guilt. Now, two policemen yank Billy and throw his elfish body in the back. From behind him, an officer shoves his hands toward an iron rail that stretches across the ceiling. With a short silver chain, he quickly links handcuff to rail. "Your wife called," he said. "Told us to find you. Lucky we did. You should be sorry." He slammed the door. Billy was. Before the police caught him, snow blinded his windshield. Soon they would send their puppies after his rancid gas leaks and blood-stained hands. He twisted the stereo dial until his car was flooded with blood-pumping bass and twinkling piano keys. His gut hurled forward. Jazz. A saxophone broke over smooth piano riffs, a waterfall breaking over a cliff. Trumpets blared, ringing his heart with every never-ending whole note. Maggie and Billy used to dance in their crowded den. Sweeping to sweet music, their feet brushed the floor. He held her so tight so many years ago, close against his chest, cradling her in his arms. Before Maggie went missing for nights at a time, she was all his, skin impossibly smooth, spilling between his fingers. No one would ever cut in. He waltzed around her songbird laughter and twirled her with flicked wrist. Her short curly hair glowed in dim light. Large black islands in her eyes believed that they were countries. He jammed his finger in the eject button, scrambled for the disc, and pressed it against his tattered jeans until it snapped.
As you notice Mom's lawn chairs match the elm's autumn, I see the honey-crisp smile of poor, clueless Joey Robertson dangling from your eyelashes. You know, he sits 3 rows behind you, has a freckle on his left ear, and smells of Axe body spray. One rips away torn blades of fresh grass you twisted around your thumb like promise. They float ceremoniously across your cheeks, ripe red and grinning. He knows you stare at your feet during gym, have an aversion to mirrors, and only look at him while he's reading. Nestled in trees' warm arms, baby birds crack through eggshells, smelling flight for the very first time, their new bodies bathing under sun. I know you like limeade, and he has green eyes. And somewhere outside our picket fence, the daisies we used to pick still grow, white and wild. For you, the fingers crossed lover in middle school, Know that an angel has left a bouquet of bated breath to give away like love letters. Cradle it close to your pink lungs. Let it bloom and wither under your brittle bones. And wait. Something new will always grow.
In these warm months of budding bloom and gallons of rain, my body is singing its youth, its prime and fruitful summer. But I have barely begun to learn how to breathe in stardust, supernovas, the universe, and sleep to the symphonic melody of a thunderstorm. But you, my troubled traveler, my wise and wondrous whiskered feline friend, the stars that lived and hissed in your veins have abandoned their light. I scarcely recognize your stilted walk, the assembly of bones stabbing through your skin. These are not parts of you I am familiar with. But with a fondness that has crescendoed over the years, I love you still, with anguish and affection. I have always thought of the two of us braving the world together, not war or disease, but a sink full of dishes or the growing grass in the backyard. I have always thought of you like that, my faithful companion. But the time came, and the hour hand had tolled its bell, and I am here regarding you as the single most thing I have taken for granted in my life. In the morning I buried you. It was cold and clear. The air stuck to me as I carved a cradle in the earth with my own hands. Now that spot forever belongs to you, and the grass will eventually sprout over the upturned soil, and I am left associating those dirt-stained sneakers I wore with death.
When I was 5, my favorite color was red. It was the color of cherries, my favorite fruit. It was the color of my mother's cheeks when my father would come home that night. It was the color of the sunset. It was a nice color. When I turned 6, I decided that I liked the color orange. I began to eat a lot of oranges, a lot of carrots. I drank a lot of orange juice, enough to know that I don't like orange juice. So I changed my mind. My favorite color was yellow, the color of the sun in which I would stare at for far too long, wondering why my eyes would have a spot on them afterwards. When I got a headache from the sun, I decided to glance down below at the ocean, the nice blue ocean. As I looked to my right, I saw a patch of flowers, hues of purple, sprouting out of the ground like little hairs on my father's chin, my father whom I hadn't seen in months. No name. Sometimes I wish I didn't have a name, didn't have a single word binding me down, placing me into a category. Sometimes I wish I had more than one. My father's favorite color was brown, dark brown, like the chocolate he'd bring home every day, breaking off a piece and telling me that if I could say the word chocolate in another language, I could have that piece. When I turned 10, my favorite color was brown. It was the color of my birthday cake and the color of the fudge dribbled over it. The first birthday cake I had made, not my father. It was the color of the pies I would create from the earth when I was small. It was the color of bark. It was the color of my dog's fur, the dog in the magazine, the dog in the photo I had taped to my wall, calling it my own because I didn't own anything. In 7th grade, I decided that my favorite color was clear. Clear because that's what I wanted to be. Invisible. Away from the questioning stares. Away from the questions of why I always dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. My dad's t-shirt. Away from the questions of why I didn't want to wear a dress to the dance.
away from the questions of why I didn't own a single dress, away from the questions of whether or not a boy had asked me to the dance, away from the questions of whether or not I talked about which boy I liked, away from the questions of why I never showed up to the dance. I thought a lot about why I never liked the color white. It was boring, plain, the color of vanilla ice cream. It reminded me of the paper used to create our bonnets in first grade, Thanksgiving. When I couldn't be an Indian, no, I had to be a pilgrim woman because the color of my skin and the gender in which I appeared to be. My favorite color was red. Red like the paper blood I used to fake my death in first grade, Thanksgiving. Red like the ketchup I smeared on my face to fool my teacher into thinking I had a nosebleed. Red like the color of the hatred for the sweater I wore to my cousin's wedding. Red like the color that would not disappear from my mind when I thought it would be better to be clear. Red like the color of a newborn when they are forced apart from their mother. Red like cherries. Red like the color of my first inhaler. One day I woke up and decided that my favorite color was green. Green of the earth, not brown of the earth. I decided my favorite color was that in which nature was made. The color of the grass that covered up the brown. I decided that I would be a color that appeared to my eye rather than a color of what appeared to my stomach. It was a day I woke up where I didn't have a favorite color. There was one day I woke up and decided that I couldn't decide on a color. Where the reds and the blues and the purples were swirling about in my mind, mixing with the yellows and the greens. The palette was too much for me to bear, so I grabbed a color and stuck with it, but the color I had grabbed had been mixed too much in my mind, for it was not just a solid color, but a rainbow. I always thought about how boring I was for liking vanilla ice cream. It's boring, plain. Not like the person eating it. The person who is pink one day, then blue the next. The person who is red with a touch of blue on Tuesdays, then green with a hint of pink on Fridays. The person who decided to not wear the white bonnet. The person who decided to sit out of the game rather than completing a woman's job of sweeping the floors and welcoming the sons home. A person who decided to speak up against separating the boys from the girls in school sports because boys play rougher. Vanilla is my favorite flavor of ice cream, but I make sure to add every color sprinkle imaginable.
Here's the thing, Polynomial. We all know that X left you, packed his suitcase, and disappeared into a little variable of mystery. But I could never solve him for you. No one could. He controlled you, managed and structured you with his degrees of power. Trust me, he doesn't have a rational root on him. And even though his coordinate plane comes to a right angle, his logic isn't very linear. No matter how long you want your division to be, your X will never travel in a straight line. He's impossible to track. Even if you think his corresponding coefficients will give some clue as to what he might be, even if you travel down the formulaic road of negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a, you'll never discover his value. Polynomial, it's going to be difficult, but just listen to me. Let go of X. He's not even a real number.
My childhood was the splayed feathers of a tawny mallard, ascending onto bigger and better things. Her fading image, the broken surface of the pond. We sat on the bankside, releasing motherless ducklings, their yellow bodies rocked in the rippled arms of the backyard lake.
The grass under my legs was a downy nest of supple twigs. Mama took 2 in each hand, saying, "Baby, they can't fly yet, but they could swim from birth." She guided my hands into the cardboard box to scoop one up in clammy palms. Just like them, I wanted to fly. So, Mama lowered me into glass, water gulping softly, breaking in my fleeting wake. Spread out V, just a ripple beneath hollow heart and grown wings. I unfolded these feathers, lifted into them, breaking the surface onto bigger and better things. But somehow, there was the slope of the bank, my mother's voice quiet behind me, the grass climbing knee-high in the sky, a blank canvas. I used to think freedom came at the spread of wings, the lift of body, leaving home.
The forest is ringing again, 5 slow chimes, and flocks of fowl fly restlessly in the open, tired air. Mom is sleeping away on some sarcastic prayer. It is hurting her, like some beautiful anger stirred in the petals, all scattered on the table beside her from some wearisome redbud. And like a prayer, her eyes just drift off, like being locked onto someone far away. There has to be some humanity, she must think. Their flocks, but none of them sounding familiar when she hears them being called by a soft voice on the Discovery Channel. "Damn demons," she'd say, a trick of the eye, like the medicine at the center of a red lollipop and floral wrapper, a bow on the back of a patchy head, velvet sheets over a canyon. They were reflections, red and yellow and blue, unnatural reflections, the ones that cause glaucoma. She'd warn me about them on the days when we'd go venturing out in the garden, and I had been sitting too close to the TV. It was spring, 1980, and we'd gone out, and the rhododendrons were reddening, rosing over in blush. She'd grown keen to them now, and like always, she bent down, touched the stem of one of the white rhododendrons, still in bloom and blushing, and whispered, "He died in the Evergreens on a Sunday." She didn't talk much after that, just sat on a patch of ground, her eyes descending with the weight and wetness of light dew. There was a mist around her, and I was inhaling, trying to thrive and move in a space where the air was a wall. But rose had turned to crimson, and something crept under the loud ringing coming up and out of the trees. "I want you to meet my father." We hadn't packed much, but water cleansers and a few hunting tools. There was a sea sky, the color of blue-eyed Marys, and we'd been trekking the hillside for a while, stepping over bluets, brushing past ferns and lemon-colored pansies. She'd been looking at the ground, having conversations under her breath and pausing periodically, feeling the wind with a wet finger. "It's gentle," she said, like feeling for gardenia leaves. Light currents carried us the rest of the way there, and my mom, with the circling of a foot, had made good with the ground. Her father was an explorer, she told me, who every day would bring her red rose gentians from Mommy, who'd had a bullet slip through her head when she was 33, like some game too soon in the path of eager hunters. She said he was a wild man, a redhead with the long hair and the tendency to say anything. They picked flowers together, giving asters their secrets and exchanging each other's flowers like a cacophony of hidden whispers. "Even now," she said, "I feel like the forest is trying to love me." He was found one day in the Evergreens, with black in his veins, holding gentias. The evergreens picked up aggressively, and the leaves and brushes stirred with bare steps, small rustling, and the sound of approaching like a graceful animal. A long-haired, gray-headed man with a charcoal face and bare chest rested his foot on a large rock where he sat. "Halito," he said. He asked us what we were doing out in the woods, cringing at our dinner plans. He'd much prefer his nuts, berries, and dry vegetables, saying we and they would appreciate it. He was a botanist at heart and had been out exploring. After we declined, he forced a smile like he knew not to ask a second time, and headed north on Bear Strike, always looking back. My mom was blushing, noticing small wisterias on the back of a tree, and whispering again, like the whole thing had happened in her head. On the brim of twilight, when the place was all nightshade, we built a fire to cook tea leaves and foxhide. A settling, calming mist had wrought my mom, and in the midst of man, she was still humming and cooking. He'd come from the trees, just standing there, overarching the fire. His shadow was a god of the ground. There was a weird bubbling, like hard water springs, slow. There was black in his eyes, and he was all gone, far removed, looking at the fox and back at her. Before I could feel her shoulder, he moved, viper-like, and I jerked back, rooted to the ground and being told by the earth to stay put. He was clawing her face, growling and forcing her back on the rocks. He shook his gray locks back and forth. Red stripes stringed in lines down her cheeks, and there was a crunch like thick bark. She managed to whimper, keeping her eyes open like she wanted to feel in her what he couldn't possibly. And there was quiet. He stood above the mess, a watchful figure, breathing like his breath was the wind, going in and out, back and forth. He looked at her like he couldn't believe her and dipped into the wilderness. She was said to be paralyzed by what they couldn't understand. She'd say Father all that week and refused to be brought flowers until finally she just stopped singing. We'd always been religious. The spiritual kind of religious, and since then, I'd kept God in an old apartment some miles away from our old house, while my mother, stiff-necked with fiery gaze, slept and watched television and mocked and cried secretly. I believed God to be something separate, something naturally unnatural from the greenery, the flocks, the asters, the one who regulated nature and man, who protected each from another. Out the window, far by the Evergreens, there's nothing but green, never fading or folding or brightening, not even with the seasons, an odd therapy a distance away. He's got you, my mom says, hanging from the side of a wheelchair. God damn it, he's got you. And the church bell rings in the trees, like it always will.
Swallowed a light bright because I thought it was funny. The person I was last week was not funny. She procrastinated. She thought too much about Chinese food. She put too much faith in her thumb drive and not enough in her ability to lose it. She was immune to good reason, paralyzed to judgment, but I guess she was good company. The person I was last week wanted to grow up so badly, she didn't stop and think about all the beauty and hard labor she uprooted in the process. She and I were weeds growing through the sidewalk, tricking ourselves into thinking we're beautiful because we're not supposed to be there. Still, I do my best to photosynthesize her flaws into food for thought, words to live by. Give me the energy to do better. And if you think about this in plant terms, this isn't about the person I was last week, but the person I was yesterday, 4 hours ago. Even as we speak, I am learning from the person I was at the start of this poem. That girl talked too much and had high expectations. Make no mistake, this is not wishy-washy. This isn't going back on a promise. In fact, this is the most honest I've been in a long while. This is an invitation. A wake-up call to arms, a request. Don't hold me to what I said last week, but especially don't hold yourself to it. Stand next to mountains and make them jealous of how much you've grown. The person I was last week swallowed a light bright. This week it was my pride. Next week, I'm thinking a Lego.